Denise?
Yeah, we can see it.
Cool. Well, hey guys, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very excited. It's actually my first time guest speaking at a school, so very interesting because I dropped out of school. So, just wanted to just quickly introduce myself. Again, my name is Cameron Almasi. I'm 25, born and raised in Palo Alto, where I met Matt, and we went to high school together. Currently, my title is, I guess, founder of the company AVI Entertainment, where we are like an independent festival producer on behalf of artists, and as well as an artist manager. I started a company called Inertia Artist Management. Collectively, between the two companies, our clients include artists like Young Thug, Black Bear, 10K Cash, Truth, Spaceman Zack, and Will Clay, who's actually from San Diego. Prior to working in music, I went to Sonoma State University for 2 years. I'm first generation Persian American, and I have some hobbies, including music, reading, and Star Wars. So throughout this presentation, when Matt reached out, I wanted to see like what was the best approach to help someone else that's trying to get their feet wet with music. And the way I found myself really learning how to navigate through the industry was just kind of being a sponge and learning other people's stories, like from when they were younger than me and my age, and how they came into it and how they navigated through it, and just general knowledge I've seeked throughout. So I thought, I'd just give you guys a rundown of my story, how I started, and share some quotes like this and other just general lessons I've learned throughout. So you guys will see throughout the slides, there'll be a yellow tab that says lesson, and that's kind of to dictate the general message of that chapter of my life. The first quote I want to start with is, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. When I was 14 years old and I wanted to be a guitar player, and there was a really dope metal band that I was super big fan of, and they were actually at the first festival I ever went to. And I ended up finding out the guitar player was a San Francisco native after going to a show over the weekend. And I ended up finding the guy on MySpace and DMing him and, basically like, yo, teach me, bro. Like, what do I have to do? Eventually he said, yeah, I'll do it. And during one of our first lessons, he said this quote. He said, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. And he described this as what set him up for success to make it in the music industry. And being like a teenager, it meant a lot to me to hear that. And it set the mindset right for me, I think, of how I needed to go about it. So I highly encourage all y'all to remember this quote throughout, when you guys want to go throughout music. Again, with how I started myself, the beginning chapter, the biggest lesson I learned was immersing myself into a community early on and just honestly being a genuine person. When I was younger and I was in high school and middle school, I was super big into guitar and I went to concerts every weekend. And by going through concerts, I met a community, right? I met a bunch of friends and a lot of people. And to be truthfully, I had more friends outside of school than I did in school at that point. So how did I keep up with them? When they all lived throughout the Bay Area and I'm a teenager. Well, I went on Facebook and I would add them, or MySpace or whatever it was. And, I'd keep in touch with them, and eventually met a ton of artists that were touring. And I'd see them, whether it's at the merch stand or outside the show when they're about to leave. And I'd be like, hey, what's up? Like, how's it going? I'd connect with them. And, you got to keep in mind, this is late 2000s and early 2010s. So Facebook was still new and it wasn't as suspect, I guess, to add a random person. So I would just add the artists after I see them. And, eventually, you grow a count of mutual friends with one another. It becomes easier to network with people you don't even know. Because it's like, oh, well, so-and-so knows him, so I'll add him too. And I'll just utilize social media early on to really get myself connected and really build these relationships with the artists that I was a huge fan of and I wanted to eventually, hopefully one day work with. That in itself led to me around high school getting really into graphic design and designing logos and album covers and pursuing photography as a hobby, because I realized that, like, I as a person felt very creative, and I really wanted to, essentially maybe be like working at a record label one day and be the graphic designer. It got to the point where, I had offers to go to Parsons and stuff like that at one point in high school. And instead I decided, I'm not going to be a graphic designer because it looks like they're all miserable. I'm going to go be in a band instead and be broke for the rest of my life. So I started a band, and we weren't that good, to be honest with you, but it was really dope because I started to be able to cut teeth with artists that I really liked. Now, eventually, I learned that the band thing wasn't for me. And so I was going to college at this point, and I realized, at this point, I decided, I'm not gonna go do music. I'm just gonna go finish my school for the next 4 years, and then I'll do music, right? Like that's what we're all taught to do. We're taught to, hey, get your degree, and then after that, you have all this time to figure it out. But I'm impatient. So the next chapter of my life really came down to the lesson of deferring to my peers to help me shine my strengths and learn all that. Around my freshman year of college, a buddy of mine who was a local Bay Area rock promoter approached me and said, hey, I want to do a 2-day festival at the Oakland Metro Opera House. You're really good at social media, so I'm going to have you run the marketing for it. And it was a really dope opportunity. I'm happy to say we sold out that event both days. 2,000 tickets sold, which for my first show, I was perplexed that we even could sell that many tickets. And it really taught me, my skill set at the time. And I was really excited about it because before this, I thought, okay, well, my way to make it in music is either I'm a graphic designer or I'm a musician. And at the time I was studying economics, and microeconomics was the classes I was taking as a freshman. And I thought, to me, I was like, oh, well, I could take what I'm learning and somehow apply this to ticketing and, throwing shows. So by this point, I decided, I'm a double down on being a promoter. I want to see what I can do. I remember with that show specifically, it was a very interesting world being able to see this network I had built throughout my, like I said, when I was younger in high school and stuff and trying to like network with artists. Cause now I was coming to a point where I was booking artists that I had added on social media. I met at a tour like a few years ago and saying, hey, I want to book you for this. How do I do it? And it was my starting point where I got people to tell me like, hey, this is the email to our agent. Here's the booking fee. Just tell them the date. We'll lock it in. And I was happy to see us be able to lock our lineup in with like with this network that I didn't even know how to utilize to its fullest. Eventually, I learned I needed to pivot and, make some changes in my life. So I got picked up by a notable Bay Area promoter called Pinup Productions, who at that time were probably the most prominent in the Bay Area for rock and alternative and that whole scene. And I started getting to book with a ton of my favorite alternative rock bands from like Real Friends and Every Time I Die and The Ghost Inside, bands like Suicide Silence and Whitechapel, which I was super into at the time. And it was an awesome opportunity because I went from, just marketing this one show to marketing all these tours that are coming in. Like, it was like, honestly, like my dream come true at the time. I thought I made it. But around 2015, things started changing with rock. And I noticed it very heavily around Q3 of 2015 when we started facing really harsh climates of just declining ticket sales. Artists that would play 1,000 cap rooms like a few months before, they're now playing, 300 cap rooms, and they might not even be able to sell out that room. And at the time, it taught me, like, maybe I made the wrong choice. Maybe I wasn't listening to the right music. Maybe it's because all the people that I went to these shows with don't go to this show anymore. They're going to electronic music shows. And, my girl at the time was telling me, like, hey, like, you should really consider going to dubstep because, that's what people your age are listening to. And that's kind of like metal. And look at this guy named Getter. He's my, my brother's or my best friend's brother. And he just got signed to Skrillex's label. And he's crushing it right now. You want to be like him, not doing these rock shows and, with a declining scene. And that's where the idea of just, I need to pivot and always be ready to pivot came. So ironically, I learned the huge lesson of going with the flow. And I remember it was in October of 2015 and Pinup did a show with Norma Jean, and which was a band that, super legacy act for like that scene. And I was really excited to be working on the show, but unfortunately the show didn't do too well. It was at the Catalyst Club in Santa Cruz at that time. And the Catalyst Club has 2 rooms. It has a small room and a big room. The big room being 1,000 cap, the small room being a 300 cap. So they were in the 300 cap, didn't sell out, was half sold, lost some money. And in the big room was Borgor and Getter. And obviously, like, my girl at the time just brought up Getter, so it was like very fresh in my head. The show was sold out, like, I mean, lying around the block, and I was kind of like jealous, and I was kind of perplexed at the same time because I would walk around the line and I'd see kids I grew up with, went to high school with, or went to college with, and they're all ready to go party, and it looked like a great time. So me and a buddy of mine at Pinup, we both had all access passes at the venue. We're like, screw it, let's just go backstage over there and see what's up. And I went there and met a few of the artists, and I met a bunch of my lifelong friends at that point at that particular show. One of them being my business partner at AVI, Sam Alavi. Um, Through that new group of friends that I met at that show, I started getting invited to go out more and going to shows every day of the week practically, whether it was in the San Francisco or Santa Cruz or wherever. And I just kept going because you know what? I like this new community I found. I like that I had a group of friends that all wanted to work. They're all my age. Whereas at Pinup, I was the youngest guy. And I found myself, saying to myself, really, like, hey, this is where I have to go if I really want to continue succeeding. So Sam Alavi and I ended up co-founding a company called Flatline Events together. And Flatline, it was at the Catalyst Club too, which was, I guess, the stomping grounds for us. And we were able to bring artists like Sudden Death and Barely Live, Squanto, Liquid Stranger out for their first time in the West Coast and Northern California especially. And it was an awesome time because we were really starting to see this new wave of electronic music, particularly bass music, that was starting to take off, and be there early on with it and see like these artists go from like 300 cap rooms to like 3,000 cap rooms. Our work, we were selling out every show at that time, and our work eventually caught the attention of a notable Bay Area promoter called Vital Events, that they're most famous for their brand Wobbleland, which is like a bass music festival they do throughout the United States. They have it in like 5 markets at this point. And eventually I got picked up by them and I went over there. The next quote I just really wanted to pass along for y'all is consistency is key. I think my buddy Jeff always tells me this, and I'm pretty sure he's not the one that came up with this quote, but I just quoted him just because he's the one that always says it to me. I believe that if you really want to see growth and opportunity come your way, it starts from like a grassroots level of being able to, start at the bottom and just deliver superb quality every time and just keep that level up all the way through and through. And I think early on, that was what kind of helped me out because I was at one point just like really just a teenager, like going to shows and then just like in a local band and then like throwing a show and then like getting picked up by bigger promoters left and right. I think the biggest factor was just the consistency in my work and just being able to always have fresh ideas and new ideas, especially as the young guy in the group. So I highly suggest you guys always remember that going into music or any industry you choose to do. So at this point in time, I'm in Vital Events, and I think the biggest lesson going from like a company that did 300 cap shows, maybe 1,000 at the biggest, to 4,000 being like our average capacity for a show was, I just really need to bring fresh ideas and just always come in with a different perspective and knowledge base than what my bosses had. Because, I wasn't really a raver. I wasn't really an electronic guy. Like, I was really a hardcore and metal dude. But I found a community in this scene, and I just ran with it. And it ended up bringing me more opportunities and got me finally like a paid gig in music where I was getting paid to market shows. And it was a really good time. We got to book artists like Illenium and Zomboy and Rez and Troy Boy and Snails and Keizo throughout that time. And, for me, what I ended up realizing during this chapter was I was kind of entering this new playing field of like, I need to start adapting my strategies because like what I did maybe for the rock bands in the 300 cap rooms and the 1,000 cap rooms, it's not going to work for a DJ in a 4,000 cap room when I need to sell it out, week up. It's a totally different ballgame at that point. So ironically enough, what really actually did me favors was one, I learned how to better hone in on my advertising and my ad skills in general. I think that was a huge factor, learning how to utilize PR to create momentum. But on the flip side of things, it was kind of super funny because like DJ culture and rock culture are totally different, right? Like they have totally different ways to market themselves, how the shows are marketed, the cultures they're marketing to, the demographics they're marketing to. And I found some of the strategies I learned through rock wasn't being adapted in electronic music as much as I would like to have seen. So I started utilizing these like ad strategies or these promotional strategies with the artists to start selling out shows. And it really helped out, you know, throughout the time I was there, we were able to sell all the shows in advance and have a good time. And I started getting my first entry point into artist management because Vital also managed the DJ in Minnesota and Jackal and Vincent and Cray. And so I started helping out with, you know, their marketing and helping out kind of just getting entry point in how to be an artist manager without, at the time I wasn't thinking about, you know, I was all about the shows. That's all I wanted to do. But it was starting to plant a seed of like how I have to be as a manager if I really want to help build an artist's career.
Cameron, can you maybe elaborate on, you mentioned you found some marketing or advertising tricks that you brought from rock over to the EDM and dub scene. Can you maybe elaborate on what a couple of those might have been?
Yeah, I think one that I really prominently remember, and I remember at the time, I never saw much of it with the DJs, but a lot of these like rock tours, they would do like tour spotlights, like with particular artists, and like, you know, have the artist take over the social media account for like a week or something like that, and like really promote the tour, promote their new music, promote the new album. And I started honing in on that too, because I was like, well, hey, this company's never done these, and I'm not really seeing much of it happen around. Obviously, it became like a more common thing later on, but like, you know, at the time, I was just like, why isn't no one else doing this? So I started doing that, you know, because it was so casual in a rock tour, you know, get the band to take over the social media. Each member takes one of the day of the week. So that was something I started doing. I generally, I guess, like the verbiage and the context of promo, like how we branded it, how we utilized, you know, like rave culture is just such a different culture, right? And like they promote a lot about like the meaning of going to the show. For me, it was like, well, hey, I also need to promote the artist and what it means to experience the show, right? The adrenaline rush you're getting, especially with bass music, where it's like, you know, let's be real, like an artist like Zomboy or Troy Boy, or Keizo or Snails, like these guys, like you watch it, it's practically a metal show. Let's be honest. It's like you want to mosh, you don't want to like sit there and talk about Plur and like, you know, well, you want to do ecstasy regardless, but you don't want to do any, you know, you don't want to just have like, you know, fun with your friends. You want to go hard. And I just realized like that's the promo I need to utilize with this. I need to show how intense this stuff is and kind of treat it how we do with metal tours. Like we're just talking about the intensity of the show. Those are like just some of the kind of ideas I had in the beginning. But with electronic music, the cool thing was I also learned better targeting, because like rock culture is just so DIY. It's like, well, you know, we have a street team and we might just like, you know, we might just like share it on Facebook. If not, and most rock promoters at that time weren't thinking like, oh, Facebook ads even. Like most of them I know that weren't even doing Facebook ads for a long time until like maybe 2 years ago, which is really late in the game if you think about it. So at that time it was just like learning all the stuff that electronic music was doing was just so new to me. Moving forward, you know, about 2017, I ended up realizing that I wanted to kind of like pursue my own. Just looking at the landscape of the music industry and just, I kind of noticed that all the people I want to be like they own their own company, you know what I mean? Like they were the entrepreneur. They went out of their way and they started their own. They weren't the employee at a company. And it just kind of hit me really hard. It was just like, yo, unless I want to like make, you know, subpar salary for the rest of my life, I might have to go out of my way and start making a name for myself. So in 2017, me and a couple of friends, we decided to launch Torque Events. And I guess the lesson for this chapter, I'm going to say, is perseverance will prevail growth. You know, we started producing electronic metal and hip hop concerts throughout Northern California, and working with artists like, you know, Subtronics and Famous Dex and Puya and Black Dahlia Murder and Getter and Rusko, which by the way, the Getter one was super dope because that was like full circle for me in a sense of like, I came into the space like, you know, through like a friend of mine really being like, hey, you want to be like this dude. And then like, you know, a few years later, I was like finally getting to book him and work directly with him. And when we went to start doing Torque, we did face a new challenge, because if you look at most genres, they tend to have like this period when the trend really becomes hot, and there's like this sort of gold rush period, right? Like hip hop a few years ago, we saw this. Like every week, a new artist is blowing up because everyone's signing new acts. Every week, it just seems like the new promoters popping up everywhere, just trying to be promoting this new sound. And electronic was no different, right? Like back in the early 2010s, it was like Insomniac and LED Presents in San Diego, Midnight Events in Sacramento. There was, like I said, Vital Events, or before that, Skills Events in Bay Area, and there's Relentless Beats in Arizona, and all these promoters all throughout the United States just kind of came in and expanded and blew up with the genre. But as trends, kind of shift and grow, they expand and contract. So, if you looked at like 5 years ago, LED Presents down in San Diego was doing not shows just in San Diego. They were all throughout California, LA, Northern California, Insomniac. They were doing shows everywhere. EDC was literally everywhere. And at some period, they all started contracting, going back to their primary territories as dominant players. So with us coming in down the line, when there's like this establishment of who runs what territory, and on top of that, we have to deal with Live Nation and AEG on top of it, we had to ask ourselves, like, well, how do we go about this without getting stomped on? Because we're the new kids, right? We're in our early 20s trying to come into this, where there's guys in their 40s like really dominating the scene. So what we decided to do was like, well, hey, a lot of the major promoters are in the primary markets, right? They're in the first markets and the secondary markets, but these tertiary markets, like these little cities like Fresno, they're being ignored completely. There's no real dominant player. There might be like one guy that's doing it, but he's not even at the same caliber as an Insomniac. So we told ourselves, like, that's what we're going to do. We're just going to pickpocket like a few of these markets and target them super hard. And with that being said, around that time, we almost immediately got, the attention of Live Nation and got to work with them and get access to their venues, which also gave us a huge leg up, because now we're not just like, a typical party planner in the city trying to throw like a rave. We now have like established corporate venues that we can utilize, and it gave us a lot of leverage when it came to booking at that time. That really helped us out a lot, I think, on top of the tertiary market target. And eventually that partnership led to us actually getting an absorption from the company. And Torque eventually became a Live Nation company at one point. Now, going to the next chapter, I wanted to take this quote, because starting out in my own company, obviously it's like, being the new guy on the block your first time, it's not easy at all. Like, on one end, the industry itself, is not necessarily loyal to you. They're loyal to the guys they've been loyal with for 10, 20 years, right? And they always want to make sure they're doing favors for them, because they're the established players. They're the ones that are always going to stay strong and cut the checks. And I think it was very stressful for me at that time trying to like come into a space that was so established, right? Electronics music had 10 years, of just building its presence. And even before that, it was 20, 30-year game, really. If you look at like Insomniac and a ton of these major promoters, they've been around since the 90s. So when that Live Nation absorption happened and I was able to start fresh again, I read this quote and it really hit me hard. It was the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And I really looked at the last few months of like what I did. Well, Torque was really a continuation of where I worked at before. It's just me doing it on my own. And, I was doing essentially similar areas. I was still in California. I was still throwing shows, in one of the most competitive markets in the United States. On top of that, I was doing a genre that was like super established already. And eventually I just kind of told myself, like, if I want to move forward and I want to have any competitive edge, I need to stop doing the same thing in every way possible and just go like hard left if I really want to like have a competitive edge. So, sorry, I need a sip of water. That led to me and Sam Alami kind of reuniting forces and co-founding AVI Entertainment in 2018. Sam at this point, became a prominent buyer throughout music and was booking for major festivals like Imagine and Euphoria, and he was, helping out with Rolling Loud on operations and all this sort of stuff. And, I on my end was had my experience on the marketing front. So we said, hey, well, you're the buyer and operator. I'm the marketing creative brand guy. Let's partner up. And the big thing with that being said about like, you know, you need to do everything different every time. Don't like kind of do the same thing, expect a different result. I told myself this time around, was like, hey, I don't want to be trying to build another promoter brand, like, you know, kind of like Golden Voices or Insomniac is. I don't really want to build, or Rolling Loud even. Like, I don't want to build a brand like that where I have to rely on all this financial risk to eventually build my own name. And I really looked at it in the perspective of the film industry, right? In film, when you want to seek investment and start building a movie, like what are the key figures an investor looks for? Like, well, who's directing it and who are the star actors, right? That's all that matters. And the same thing goes with a show. It doesn't matter who's throwing the show. At the end of the day, if the lineup sucks, you're not going to go to it. You're not going to buy a ticket to it. So I was looking at stuff like Camp Flogna with Tyler, the Creator, and seeing like how much of a hyped up festival it was, how much momentum there was for it. And at the same time, you know, it almost doesn't even matter what they book. I mean, it does to some extent, but it doesn't matter because Tyler, the Creator, is hosting it. It's his brand. And people want to support Tyler's. Tyler's fans want to see him. So that being said, we ended up shifting the focus and partnered with Young Thug and started his own festival called Family Business in 2019. We had artists like Trippie Redd and Smoke Perp and Lil Keed and 10K Cash and a ton of other artists on the lineup. And building that lineup ended up getting the attention of AEG at that time. And they reached out to us and were like, well, hey, we want to co-produce this with you guys. What can we do here? And they became our financier and they helped finance the whole festival. And yeah, we had a crush. We sold 5,000 tickets the first year. And it was in Dallas, Texas too, which is kind of the funny part because I've never been to Texas. I've never done a show in Texas. I know a few people in Texas. That was about as far as it goes. And it met that whole mantra of like, don't really do the same thing over and over again. Like, we went to a totally different market we've never been before, really dabbling down in a genre that primarily my experience wasn't in hip hop, right? I've done a few shows here and there, but I'd never done it to this capacity or this capacity of an artist. And, you know, it caught the attention of a very reputable corporate brand, and it crushed its first year. And it just taught me that it's like, if you build the right product, the people will come to you. And really, like, it also taught me was that, like, my opportunities were really limited to myself and what I set as my own boundaries. I could have easily gone and said, hey, I'm not a hip hop guy, so I'm not going to do it. Or, hey, I've never been to Texas, so I'm not going to do it. But I said, screw it. Like, let's just do it. What is there to lose? And, you know, in a lot of ways, you could say that's a really risky mentality, but it really paid off and really shaped out the next year and a half for me at that point, which was really me going into management. Shortly after that event, 10K Cash reached out to me and said, hey, I'm looking for management. You know, I just signed a deal with Def Jam Records. Your show was a crush. Like, let's work together. And you know, it was really dope because like we step in together. He just got this deal with Def Jam, and you know, it was awesome. Like, you know, I worked on his EP following up called Planet Swagger, and throughout that time, you know, it was a busy time of networking. Now I was getting positioned with meeting the labels, right? Because to be honest with you, I never even considered working with a label. Didn't really think about that side of the business ever. And all of a sudden, here I am. I'm working with, like, you know, a label whose CEO is freaking a manager to Eminem, and was one of my favorite artists growing up, and all this stuff. And you know, we had a hit single, Aloha, which now has over 26 million streams. And upon, you know, the release of his EP, you know, he became the #1 TikTok artist throughout the Universal Music Group roster, ahead of like Ariana Grande and The Baby and Justin Bieber, who had momentous records to compete with it. And, you know, by the end of that year, we ended up getting voted as a top 10 album by the New York Times. And it was crazy to me because it was like, I could have easily said no to this. Like, I could have just been like, nah, I'm not a manager. I'm just going to keep doing concerts. And what I ended up finding was a new passion, something I realized I was pretty good at. Utilized a lot of my networking skills to its fullest. And at the same time, it was different, like, because it wasn't, concerts are stressful, but doing this is a totally different type of stress. So I was like, I like this kind of stress a little bit more. And it taught me that, you know, when opportunity presents itself, you really got to exploit it to this fullest. You can't just say like, hey, I've never done this before, so I'm not gonna. You got to say, hey, I haven't done this before, but I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna do it the best job I can with it, because that's the only way you'll grow, really. Now, one of my favorite quotes is "Work smarter, not harder." The reason being is because I think I see a lot of my peers come in and they grind morning to night. And that, don't get me wrong, you need to do that. Like, you have to have a hard work ethic, especially in music, because there's so much competition around you. You always got to be the guy grinding and has a better work ethic than the next guy. But I think one of the better advantages is also being able to cut steps, right? And be able to create solutions almost immediately at the least amount of moves. When I was a teenager, I was super into the Rubik's Cubes, and like I would compete in the Rubik's Cubes. And the thing I learned doing that was that the guys that do it the fastest and get the world records and get the best times, one, they learn the most number of strategies to utilize, and they learn how to do it in the least amount of moves. So they're really fast at identifying a problem, skipping a few steps, and solving the whole thing with the least amount of moves total. And I think that's a mentality I've tried to bring in doing music as well. And I think it'll shape with the next few slides as well. So, you know, that being like my story and where I'm at now, now I have, you know, clients like Will Clay, who's like, you know, a 3-time Olympic medalist and, you know, a multi-platinum artist. And, you know, I've added a lot more to artists in my roster like Truth and Spaceman Zack since 10K and gone fully into management. I want to really transition more in this conversation to, you know, not the present time, but more so, you know, I guess the key traits I've seen throughout the industry of like people that do really well. And the big one I gotta say is really be entrepreneurial and entrepreneurial. Because whether it's you working at an organization or a company, corporate or independent, or you're starting your own company, which, you know, I've seen the industry favor a lot of, you got to be the guy that comes in, or the girl that comes in with the solutions, comes in with disruption, comes in with new ideas and fresh takes, and doesn't just follow the rules and do what he's supposed to do. The industry really rewards people that go out of their way. They work extra hours. They do everything to help the organization as a whole. And I promise y'all, if you guys go to any company or do whatever you have to do, if you come in with this mindset, it's going to help you guys so much with opportunities and growth. The second biggest thing I want to really push on is that your relationships are your leverage. The entertainment business is solely built off of relationships. I want to have any opportunity. I want to have any growth in my career just off of my skill set. My skill set means nothing if I'm not someone people want to work with, especially in this kind of business. Because there's another guy that just as much, or girl just as much as you, that's going to work as hard as you. You want to be the one that they favor the most. I can single-handedly say, yeah, like all my experiences, the relationships were what helped me go to the next step. And the people that believed in me the most and invested in me the most were the ones that helped me get the most growth and success out of anything in this business. The third thing I really want to push here is, and this one I really don't see much of, and I wish I did, is know the business and the key players inside and out. If you guys want to, you know, work in music or entertainment, you got to realize that, you know, on one end, it's a passion-driven industry. So a lot of people come into it with this mindset of like, oh, well, I love music and I believe in it so much and I believe I can make it, right? Well, good. But you got to know the infrastructure too. You got to know everything about the business. You got to know the key players. You got to know how much market share they own in each territory. You got to know, you know, who's the CEO? How did he get up there? How did he get to that point? What's the private equity firm that's investing in them? Well, you know, what was their IPO? Did you read the financial reports? Like, all these are tedious things that a lot of people just don't care about. But it's what holds them back versus other people. Because if you really want to make it, you got to know these things. For instance, I just talked the other day with a buddy of mine who's he's a journalist in music, and I was talking about the consolidation of the record labels. I'm not sure if any of you guys know this, but the ginger ale company Seagram's was the one that actually made Universal Music Group. They were the one that acquired all the labels and consolidated them. Or for us, Live Nation, the biggest live music promoter in globally, really, was actually consolidated by a radio broadcasting billionaire named Robert Sillerman, who consolidated all these indie promoters during the 90s and really helped the industry shape into what it is now. Prior to that, it was Wild Wild West. Everyone had their territory and that was it. But he was the one that said, hey, we're going to make a big corporation out of this. And a lot of people don't know that stuff. That's the kind of stuff you should know, because that's what's going to help you beat the next guy, because you actually understand how this industry was built and how it's structured. The fourth thing I really want to push on is know your value, but be realistic. On one end, you got to be able to tell yourself, how far you're going to be able to go and say, like, this is who I want to become. This is where I want to be. But on the flip side of things, you also got to be realistic with what the industry is. The fact of the matter is most entry-level positions in the industry pay really bad. They're $30K a year jobs. And a lot of people get discouraged even working in music just off of that one thing. And this ties into the second point, which is don't be short-sighted, because, truthfully, like, I'll tell you guys now, like, I could have easily just said, oh, well, there's no money in music, I'm not going to pursue this industry. But I told myself, no, I'm very passionate about this, and this is really what I care about at the end of the day. And I will say the biggest growth came from not focusing on the dollar amount, but focusing on the passion first, and to get some accolades for myself and get some accomplishments going. And it's kind of funny. I make the joke all the time with my friends that pursuing your passion is kind of like, pursuing a significant other, right? When you guys, when you guys go try to hit on a girl, if you try to force it, it doesn't really work out, does it? You guys kind of got to let it happen on its own and be organic with everything that you do in life. And this is the same thing. Don't force your growth. Just let it happen on its own. At the same time, don't act desperate. Don't act desperate for the opportunities and the jobs. Like, you want them, but you got to remember, you got to hold your composure, because that's what's going to build trust with people. People can feel desperation. A lot of people come in this business with a lot of passion and like, oh, well, I need this job really bad. Well, you got to realize that you got to work for it, and you got to be better than the next guy. And you got to be patient for it to come. Job offers will come when people start seeing your value and what you can do for yourself. Don't stop learning. That's a huge factor. Again, I talked about it earlier. You got to know the key players and know everything inside and out, but you also want to come into this as a sponge, and anyone you meet, you want to know their story. Whether they're someone that's significant to you or not significant to you in this business, you got to just understand what they did to get to where they are. Because if they're able to live off of this and do it full time and do it comfortably, especially during COVID, they're doing something right. So just listen to them, because you always pickpocket knowledge from every person you meet. A lot of times I see people come into it and they just really want that mentor, and they really want to meet that guy that's running that one company, or, has a nice title at a company. And that's cool. But you got to also remember that a lot of stuff you're going to learn is also going to be from people your age and that are also coming into it and trying to make their moves as well. So just always listen to everyone you meet and learn from everyone. Roll with the punches. I learned this the hard way going into starting an independent company on my own in my early 20s, and just realized that, what, you got to pay your dues, and you got to show people that I'm here to stay and I'm not going to leave. And you got to work your butt off, to really have, these relationships be solidified and have that leverage be solidified. So I really, I want to tell everyone that's starting out, just do your best to really roll with all the BS you're going to have. Whether someone else screws you in a deal or a transaction or whatever it is, just roll with it and keep going. And finally, just stay in touch with your youth, because I think this business really, really, really rewards those that understands the next generation better than themselves. And that's what you want to be. You want to be the person to say, well, hey, I understand what 16-year-olds and teenagers are into, why TikTok is the new platform, and how it's really what Instagram is to us is what TikTok is to the kid in high school right now. And I understand why that's breaking music, and understand what kind of the sounds and trends are they looking into. Even though sometimes it's I like 10K Cash as an example because a lot of people don't understand his sound. They don't realize that to a 16-year-old, they love that music. But maybe to a mid-20-year-old or even a 30-year-old, they don't get it at all. And that's something you got to really be able to understand and say, hey, I get why this is dope. Something for me that really helped, I think, was just kind of being multi-genred and going from like a scene like death metal and hardcore music down to like electronic and rap, because I could see the value of every genre and say why people like it for what it is, and say why this new band that's coming in or this new DJ or rapper coming in, why people like them, and identify it. Whereas some people might not be able to ever. With that said, I also want to tie into like, I guess some of the L's I've taken throughout the years and just like what I learned from them. I said earlier, you got to, kind of roll with the punches. And it's really hard to do, but one thing I highly advise is don't ever lose your integrity. If someone does a low blow or anything, you're going to see that a lot in music. People come in all the time and, they want to do whatever they can to succeed and grow. And you got to realize that, this is, as much as this is your passion, this is everyone else's passion too, coming into this. So I highly just suggest, like, be able to roll with those punches and just never lose your integrity, never say something bad, never, lose your cool, don't do anything that really will affect you, because it will stick and people will remember that, even if you feel it's justified, just don't do it. I highly suggest, even with that note, even end and filling relationships early on. If there's someone you can't really work well with, or you have a really abusive boss or whatever, you don't let it happen. Just say, okay, you know what, like, this isn't working for me, I'm a dip. A lot of people I've seen in this business keep a job where they feel abused and they feel that they're not being valued and they're not, being treated well. And they're too scared to leave because they're like, oh, well, I'm not gonna be able to find another one. This was my one job I got in music. Don't worry about that. Just like be able to tell yourself, hey, like, this isn't working for me, so I'm gonna check out and go check what other opportunities I have. And I guarantee you guys, if you learn to do that and pivot, you're always gonna get a better opportunity down the line. This is one of my favorite things, is understanding the difference between a scene and the industry. The reason I say this is that a lot of people, it's very prominent, especially if you're a manager or a promoter and whatnot, or an agent even, you're going to go to a lot of shows. You're going to go to a lot of clubs weekly. At one point, like a few years ago, I was probably going 4 times a week, 5 times a week to shows, just to network and build my network. And to be honest with y'all, I ended up burning myself out, going out to 2 a.m, 4 to 5 times a week, and trying to just like shake hands with these people. And eventually I just kind of realized was that I didn't have to do that. Yeah, on one end you want to early on to like network and reinforce your relationships, but on the other end you got to realize the industry isn't at the nightclub on a Tuesday night till 2 a.m. It's really it's in Century City and Beverly Hills and New York and Nashville and it's a 9 to 5 job. They work at talent agencies and major labels. That's the industry. And that's an email. You could find that person's email and be persistent there and just check in with them 5 times till they respond to you, and set up a phone call. You don't need to go to the show to shake hands with everyone. And by all means, I'm not saying don't do it. What I'm trying to enforce is that you got to recognize the difference between the two, because a lot of times going to those, you're going to meet a lot of people that are involved in a scene aspect of it. They know people that might know some people, but you're not always going to meet like that one agent that has the act that you want to book next week, or that label A&R. It's not always like that. So I say, be cautious and be able to intertwine between the two and understand the difference. Don't overextend promises. This is one of the biggest things. It's like, whether you're booking a show or you're working with an artist or a client, don't ever make a promise you can't keep. I would almost say, like, always be realistic with them what's going to probably happen. So if anything better happens, they're surprised just as much as you are. You don't ever want to promise someone gold and then give them silver. That's a way that I think can damage relationships and damage your reputation. With that being said, also, it's just take accountability for your failures and just learn to move on, because you're going to take a lot of L's throughout this. It's whether it's a show or managing an artist or whatever you do, you're going to have a situation where you're probably just going to make a mistake, or something's going to happen that didn't work, a deal didn't work out, went south, or whatever. Don't let it hold you back. Don't let it hurt you. Don't let it get your integrity going or anything. Just learn to say, okay, screw it. This happened. I need to move on to the next one and keep going. I said in the next point being don't bend for anyone. And that kind of touches back to the unfulfilling relationships. I think a lot of people I've seen over the years, because they understand how important relationships are in this business, they get really scared when someone comes at them the wrong way or is acting very abusive or not necessarily being, treating them with the respect and the values that they should hold for themselves. I think the best thing you could do for yourself is always stand your ground and just say, hey, can't do that to me. And just say, like, that's not what I'm not going to allow that to happen. And hold your ground. Because if people learn that you're willing to just take it and bend over and do whatever they say you're going to do and get scared about it, they're going to take advantage of you. Just always be sure you don't do that. And because you'd be surprised how often it happens in music because of the fact that for people it's just such a passion and creative industry. My next big point would be you stop winning when you stop persisting. I see this especially as a manager. Your job as a manager, you're not going to get paid a salary, right? You're not getting paid hourly. You're getting paid commission. And if you're getting paid commission, you got to remember that there's no security for you at all. You just constantly got to bring in a deal and bring in opportunities for your client and help him grow. And so if you just stop persisting, you're not going to win at all. And it's not just as a manager, but as a manager, I see this firsthand all the time now. You just got to continue pushing forward. Don't be scared to be the annoying person and checking in on someone on email or calling their office a bunch and trying to get their attention. Do whatever you can to continue bringing opportunities to the table. Because if you stop persisting that way, it's just not gonna happen. And with that being said, also don't get excited when opportunities do come your way. They come and go every day. Especially now with COVID, it's more common than ever. Just learn to be calm, learn to be chill, and just let it come learn to have it come as it comes. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. With that being said, the last one I really want to push on, and this is very important, is good impressions are easy to forget, but bad impressions are easy to remember. I think the best way to describe this, I remember there's a few people, I'm not going to name who, but it's a DJ actually, and I met him probably 10 times, and every time it was the best conversation ever. Like, we were chatting for like an hour and a half, we were drinking, we were having fun. And then the next time he'd see me, he's like, hey, man, what's your name? How are you? Who are you? And I'd be like, man, we just met last time for like 2 hours. We were chatting. You don't remember me? He's like, oh, no, sorry. And I probably happened 10 times so that person remembered me. And it just made me realize, and this happens a lot in music, and I've seen it happen a ton for other people as well. It's just remember that, good impressions are easy to forget. Like, these people meet a ton of people all the time. They're not always going to remember who you are and what you're doing. But don't let there be a bad impression, whether it's like you said the wrong thing or you tripped in front of them, I don't know. Like, whatever it might be, just remember that the bad impression is likely going to be the one that they remember you for immediately, whereas the good impression you're going to have to reinforce a bunch of time. Now, if you look at this slide, on the side there's two photos. One is the dude eating crap, but the other one's actually Nipsey Hussle, the rapper that unfortunately passed away about a year ago. The reason I put him on this slide was actually, and I highly encourage y'all to learn his story, just like him as a person, because it's a very interesting one where it's, he was a XXL freshman in the early 2010s, and he had a deal with Epic that went south, and he ultimately got dropped by the label. But people don't remember that about him. They really don't. You could say that those were his L's and he could have just ended there, but what people remember him for is for the values he brought in after that, and like the career he built for himself after that as an independent artist, and the success he had on his last album, being Grammy nominated, the businesses he opened throughout his home area. And that's, I think, a prime example of just just roll with the punches. Don't let your losses stop you, but learn from them and keep growing. The next quote I really want to mention, it's from Michael Rapino, the CEO of Live Nation. It's the entertainment industry is a river of nickels and dimes. The reason I love this quote is because I feel it as a promoter and I feel it as a manager. As a promoter, if I could just tell you guys now, you're putting up a lot of money to throw an event, but you're also looking to get about a 10% to 15% at best profit margin, which isn't much by all means. Most businesses, goes way higher. It's up to 30% or more. This quote, I think, really shows the mentality you need to have coming into it and realize, like, how do I open every avenue if I really want to make this my career? And how do I monetize off of every form of it? Because that's the best way you'll have a stable career doing it. And with that said, I want to just really talk about the difference between business and pleasure. On one end, you got to understand that coming into this industry, you're going to come into an industry that's fueled by creativity and creative minds. You know, we're not talking about oil and real estate here that are hard, cold assets. We're talking about someone's genuine intelligence, like creating something so unique and so compelling and so touching for people, and how that affects them. And you got to kind of realize that in this industry, you're going to deal with a lot of, on one end, there's the left brain and the right brain. There's the people that are very sensitive and emotional, touch with their emotions, and they might be the most disorganized people you'll ever meet, but they create true art and passion and creativity. But on the other end, you're dealing with people who are also very corporate-like, and they're dealing with numbers and data and logistics, and they're trying to really maximize revenue potentials for people. And sometimes those two worlds don't go along with each other, right? Because on one end, it's like my integrity as an artist, but on the other end, it's like, well, how do we make money off of this, and how do we succeed? So it's good to remember that the ultimate goal of the entertainment business is to make money. The ultimate goal as a business is for them to always reach a wider audience, continue selling out shows, continue selling out records and getting #1 hits, continue growing the industry year by year with compound growth and profit margins and all that good stuff. But you also got to remember that this business is also high risk and low reward. So for that same purpose, it takes a lot of work to get to that point. The fact of the matter is most films, most albums, most concerts don't recoup their money. They lose money. I think in films specifically, I just recently read that it's out of 10 films, maybe 2 of them will profit. The other 8, they lose money. You got to remember those other 8 are about $150 million budget on average, maybe higher or lower, give or take. So you got to remember for 10 of those films at that intensive a budget, 2 of them profited, and it might recoup the loss or it might not. So coming into this, you got to always ask yourself, well, how do I mitigate my risk? Whether I'm a promoter, whether I'm trying to start my own record label, whether I'm trying to manage an artist, you got to always ask yourself, how do I differentiate? How am I able to really get ourselves to be a legitimized business and start incurring serious profits? But at the same time, understand that you're going to deal with people that have, a huge passion of what they're doing, and they want to reserve their art to be true to what they are. And they're not trying to sell out. And that's the real challenge here. And I said at the end of this is, an industry leader, in my opinion, is the one that can liaison the right and the left brain and can understand both worlds. If you can master that, you're going to go so far, because you're going to understand how to speak with an artist and how to build trust with an artist and how to show him that you care about his craft and you believe in it. But at the same time, understand, how do I actually believe in my business at the same time, my industry at the same time, to continue growing and being a fruitful industry. In this slide, I have Rick Rubin on one end and Leor Cohen on the other. Leor being reputable as like this sharp businessman and the shark and super mogul status and respectable. He's now the head of music at YouTube, and he was the president of Def Jam, and he founded 300 Entertainment in a time when the label business was really at an all-time low, and just a true shark at what he does. But on the flip side of things, you have Rick Rubin, who he's known for his like Shangri-La Studios and being this reputable producer that's made hits for bands like Slayer or Jay-Z or Beyonce or so on and so forth. Co-founded Def Jam Records. He was a huge figure in the start of hip-hop. And I think in between is the silver lining of what you want to become. On one end, you want that mogul mentality. On the other end, you want to be that visionary of sound and art. This is honestly, I just added this quote because I couldn't think of anything else to add. But it's "If you're not first, you're last" by Ricky Bobby. Which in business in general, I will say this is very true. And in music, I will say it's even more true. If whether you're an artist and you're trying to make it in a certain genre. I would say argue that the biggest figures that blow up in a genre are usually the ones that are there first. I mean, you got to think about like electronic music. Who are the biggest names right now, right? It's people that were a part of their wave early on and really were the prominent figures at that point and continued to hold that prominence throughout. Hip hop, you're seeing that same thing. You're seeing it with rock music, you know? Rock music, I think, is a good example because it's harder for a band now to even come in and blow up than ever before. You know, there's not much of a new trend going on in rock music this day, unless we're talking about like Machine Gun Kelly and Youngblood coming to the picture and bringing that solo act with that reviving that pop punk sound. So just remember, whatever you do in this business, make sure you're always first in whatever it is.
Hey Cameron, I'm just going to interrupt for 1 second. So if anyone has a class or another commitment to get to and you have to go, we are recording this and we can send it to you. But if you can stay, please do, because there will be time for questions at the end.
Cool. So, I mean, one of the last things I really wanted to talk about was the world we are in today. Obviously, COVID-19 hit, and especially hit the live music world. So, you know, really the question now becomes, you know, I believe now is the best time for you to come in as an entrepreneur in music, just because we're on one end seeing the deconsolidation of agencies for us. Of like a lot of agents are leaving Paradigm and CAA and WME and starting their own boutiques now. On the flip side, I think a lot of, you know, independent promoters are making moves for greater growth, and a lot of companies are starting to find, you know, new opportunities to build up. You have now a time where you can make solutions that may have not been there before. The fact of the matter is, entertainment doesn't like typically innovating and evolving, but now is a time where it needs it more than ever. So I highly encourage y'all, if you guys have solutions, pursue them now, because this is the best time to do it. One of the biggest problems we have right now is touring is gone. Artists can't go on the road. So what is that new medium? On one end, we see drive-in concerts happening, which I personally think is very archaic, but people believe that's the solution. Go for that. We need drive-in theaters, and we need to throw concerts there where people sit in their cars and watch the artists play. On the flip side, we're seeing the advent of live streaming becoming a more bigger theme in music. You know, people are, you know, hosting events on Twitch and YouTube all the time, and major brands like Rolling Loud just did a partnership integrating themselves as a media brand, you know, not just a promoter, but a full-on media brand in music. One thing I really want to even push on even further is the cross-pollination of music and gaming. We're seeing companies like Fortnite, which they had massive success with the Travis Scott event they did earlier this year, but now they're starting a concert series. Just recently, they had Dominic Fike perform on Fortnite, and they're continuing to evolve on it. And we've seen this trend for the last few years already slowly kind of trickle in as esports became more of a prominent place in entertainment as a whole. But now we're seeing how it integrates with music and new and unique opportunities. And I think this is a time where we're going to see that accelerate in a lot of ways. One thing I really want to really touch base on is the concept of entertainment being recession-proof versus pandemic-proof. If you look at the history of the entertainment business, and this doesn't just go with music being a huge part, live music being a huge part, but also film. The entertainment business has, if you look at it in a 7-year span, it's always been fairly recession-proof. It's never really took a massive hit during recessions. It's actually had a ton of compound growth annually in a very linear manner. The fact of the matter is, you know, music, film, all this sort of stuff falls into the experience economy. The idea of, you know, we're willing to pay premium prices to go on vacation and go to Six Flags, or, you know, we're willing to, you know, pay extra money just to have better seats at the movie theater and have, you know, a vibrating chair or whatever. You know, people are willing to pay premium prices always if the experience is compelling enough for them, whether it's a good or service. Unfortunately, entertainment was not pandemic proof, so we're hitting a huge stall. But I think the reason I bring this up is because I want to remind you guys that this is a business that's seen compound growth annually and hasn't been hit by, you know, financial disasters, whether it was the Depression or it was the last recession we had in 2008, 2009. This is just temporary, and once the COVID-19 pandemic solves itself out, we're gonna have hopefully another, you know, 10, 20, 50, 100 years of growth for the industry. So just remember that going into it. It might look really bad right now, but that this is just temporary. And finally, I just want to tell y'all, like, what can you offer right now in this world? What can you offer in music? What do you see being the future of music? Because now, like I said, it's the time to come in and do it. And I highly encourage y'all to ask yourselves that and double down on it. I've already talked to Matt earlier today, who told me, he saw a solution doing music. And I don't want to go too deep into it. I'm not sure if he told people, but it's genius what he told me earlier today. And it's a solution that we need in this industry. And it was actually a solution that I've known a lot of people have been looking for years. And it's cool to see him now pursue as a startup.
Thank you. I think a couple of them know a little bit about it. But.
Cool. That's why I didn't say anything about it too deep. But before I wanted to end this, I wanted to just share some resources. And so obviously this will be recorded. I'll also send the slides to the team so y'all can have it. A few platforms, if you're trying to go as an A&R or manager, I highly recommend the site chartmetric.com. It's an analytics software and platform, well, software on a website, and it also, it's really a good A&R tool. You will find artists that are growing and trending and look deep into their numbers. If you can pay for the membership, I highly, highly recommend it because it gives you access to a ton of data. And this is actually how I found a ton of my recent signings, was just off this platform. And, I'm not going to get too deep into it now, but a lot of the new clients I've signed, I'm glad I signed them the time I did, because now they're getting a lot of opportunities that, it's perfect timing for them. Jake Goodell, who's the manager for artists like Zoo and, Gallant and a few others, he has a blog called The Art of a Manager. And I highly recommend, if you're trying to go into management, read it, because it really does a good job of that concept of left brain versus right brain, and being able to deal with an artist firsthand and, motivate him and convince him and do the things you have to do as a manager to help grow the artist. I myself have read a ton of them, and I've told them myself, your blog has taught me so much and helped me so much navigate this industry. If you're looking to be a promoter and work at an agency, I highly recommend the publication Polestar. It's kind of like the Billboard magazine, but focused more on live music. It's a trade publication, and it gives you all the updates of what's going on in the touring world. They have all the insider info. I highly recommend it. And on the flip side, there's a podcast, and I'm not sure if it's active anymore. I think they started again, but they stopped for a while, called Promoter 101. You can find it on YouTube and Spotify. It's awesome podcast. It interviews pretty much any notable promoter, whether it's independent or corporate, whether it's Jay Marciano at AEG or Michael Rapino at CEO, or Sam Pearl at Gracia Live in Belgium, an independent promoter there, or any agent you want to know, like Mark Geiger or Mitch Blackman. It's a really good podcast. They talk about their life story, how they got to where they are, what they do, and it's like I said, it's good to know everybody inside and out, especially any sector you're going into, and I think that's one of the best ways to do it. General music and just music law, I would highly recommend the book All You Need to Know About the Music Business by Donald Passman. This book has been recommended to me by pretty much all my mentors and told this is the blueprint for making it in the music industry. And if you want to know the inside and outs of the industry, I highly recommend that book. And I haven't read this book, but a lot of people recommend it to me, is How to Make It in the New Music Business by Ari Hurston. Highly suggest that one too if you guys want to just get a fresh take. I haven't read it, so I really can't refer it, but it's been recommended to me so many times, and I've been slacking on it so hard. So at this point, I'm just going to recommend it because how often it comes to me. And I just wanted to end this with this one quote, actually by Nipsey Hussle. It's, you got to have a sense of humor to know that the bullshit is going to happen. You can't be too serious about it or too emotional and fake when the bullshit happens. And what I mean by this is, like I said earlier, you're going to roll with a lot of punches coming into this industry, whether it's working at a job or working for yourself. And it's a tumultuous business. At least that's what my therapist calls it. It's a very tumultuous business, and a lot of stuff's going to happen. You're going to have highs and lows happen all the time to you. And you just kind of got to learn to take a step back, smile, kind of laugh at it, how much of a joke it is at the end of the day with all this stuff going on, and just move on and keep going. That's one of the best advice I can give you, and I wish I told myself this 4 years ago or 5 years ago. I think I'll probably be a lot less stressed and have a lower blood pressure. And yeah, that was my presentation for y'all. My email's right here. If you guys want to reach out and do one-on-one interviews of like what you can do, like what do you think I could do in this business, where should I go, or even inquire about internships or anything, just contact me. We'll get a time and we'll talk. And yeah.
Dude, that's awesome. You'd be getting one hell of a round of applause if we were in person right now. Also, touching back on the topic of relationships, I definitely never would have thought when I was a freshman in high school and Cameron was a senior in high school and we had some silly Spanish class together that I would be someday hosting him at my university to talk about the music industry. So be nice to people.
Yeah, I also owe it to you. I cheated on your Spanish exams a few times.
Isn't that good? I thought I sucked at Spanish. Anyway, so if anyone wants to ask questions, now's the time to speak. I'll even start it off because I notice in some of my classes when teachers ask students to ask questions, it takes a little bit of time for people to catch up. So I think you talked about this a little bit, but having gone from like metal, then to EDM, and then rap, which are three pretty different scenes, have you had like a really different experience working across them? Is it more overlapping, or have you noticed like stark differences and had to learn new things?
Oh, they're all so different. It's kind of comedic with how stereotypical they can become at times. So, the one overlapping fact about all three is that they're all DIY based industries. You know, rock bands grind, the promoters, the artists, they all grind their teeth to like build themselves. You know, rap music, you see it all the time. I grew up in the streets and now I made my own label. Now I'm a mogul, right? Like you see it all the time. Electronic music, same thing. But the differentiation I would say is like for as of like rock music, very anti-establishment, right? The idea of like, oh, I don't need to sign to a label. I just need to tour with my buddies and do all this. You know, in rock music, you don't see too many people come into it and being like, oh, I'm going to do this for money. I'm going to be a millionaire booking rock shows and metal shows, right? Like, you don't ever hear about that. No metal band's ever gone on tour and been like, I'm going to be a millionaire for this. You know, like they did it because they purely loved it. And I think rock really taught me that. Just like go into it because you love it. Don't put the money first and try to say, I'm going to be this, I'm going to be the next P. Diddy. Don't do that. You go into it because you're really passionate about it. On the flip side, hip hop, you know, it's rooted from street culture, but it's, at the same time, it's like, I would say it's the best industry of building enterprise left and right. I mean, look at like the successful names, whether it's Quality Control Records and like how they nurtured artists like Migos and Lil Yachty and Lil Baby and like, you know, have built this solid brand label. Or, you know, you see P. Diddy and him starting out as like an intern for Ari Harrell's label and going over and starting his, you know, Bad Boy Records and now being like this big name actor and, you know, vodka owner and artist and everything in between. There's a huge discrepancy in mentality of like being an artist in all these areas. I would say, you know, hip hop really focuses on building the business. And I find motivation in the differences of every single one of them, you know, and I think that's something that's really helped me out because I understand every culture a little differently, and I understand the little quirks and features of every sector of music, and at least the three that I've been involved in.
If anybody else would like to ask Cameron a question, now is your chance.
I would just say, like, I do rock music, and, like, I've totally noticed, like, what you're saying. Like, it seems like most people that I talk to, like, they're not really in it for, like, the money. Like, they're really in it for, like, the music, which is why I think it's, like, a really cool genre.
Yeah. And rock music right now is actually, I think rock kind of like electronic music and hip hop kind of overshadowed rock the last 5 years, and like
Yeah, for sure.
But I think we're in the golden age of what's about to be the new resurgence of rock. Because like this year, MGK just put out his biggest album, and it's a pop punk record. Youngblood's probably arguably one of the biggest figures. The band Paris just put out a major label record. Bring Me the Horizon, one of my favorite bands, has put out hits after hits. And given I'm more on the alternative metal side, I'm not in like the indie side as much, but so I'm speaking of what I've seen. But you know, Bring Me the Horizon has had like a momentous year. They put out 3 solid hits. They're integrating with new artists really well, like Youngblood, and you know they're putting out singles, and they've shown that quarantine can't stop them. And I'm really excited to see where rock goes in the next few years. I think we're about to have a really big wave of rock bands coming in, and I think it's going to happen in the form of solo artists. It's not necessarily going to be a full band. It's going to be like one figure coming in doing the band, really.
Yeah. Have you heard of Greta Van Fleet?
Yeah, they're awesome.
Yeah, really cool.
They're super solid. I love their music, actually, yeah.
Especially with the development of like Ableton and just personal DAWs, there's so many good sampler instruments that can get really, really close to imitating a real sound. And it's definitely possible for one person to basically create a rock band off their computer.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I think for the longest time, bands, and I see this from firsthand experience, is that rock bands tend to be a little, we need to be in the studio at the same time to make this record. And so we have to make an album first and wait the next 3 years and while we go on tour and write this album, then do it in a month span of writing that album and go to the studio and record it, then put it out as a project. And I think more recently, bands are starting to realize, well, no, we don't. Like, you get a Focusrite Scarlett 2i2, record your guitar tracks. I'll do my vocal tracks, do the bass tracks, and we'll send it off to a producer and then get our drummer to just record on it, when it's all finished, and, put out a record. And so now bands are starting to realize, like, okay, well, we could put out more records. I think the bigger challenge is now those indie rock labels have to really modernize their strategy from being albums focused to like singles focused, because that's really what the industry is at these days.
Hey, Cameron. Oh, yeah. Hey, I have a question. I'm like an EDM producer artist, but I haven't really started to put stuff out and try to create like a fan base. But from your perspective on managing artists, what's the best way to start creating a fan base and getting people to start listening to your music while being different?
Honestly, man, I think the artists I've seen do really well, they start so grassroots. Like, it literally, like, it starts off with, like, okay, look, first of all, you got to understand the concept that you got to build a brand around yourself, right? And you got to build a proper presentation to really get eyes on you, right? On the flip side of things, the bigger challenge is even make a good song that's going to get people talking. The fact of the matter is, no good brand is going to make people talk on itself. It's also got to be the music you put out. So that if you could come into it off the bat with a solid brand and aesthetic built out for you, a solid strategy to create that awareness around, whether it's your micro community or on the macro level of like PR and like getting attention on like a publication or a blog or whatever it is, and utilizing the new platforms to really get people's attention as well, and come out with solid music, it's gonna build over time. And the artists I've seen that really crush it, they start off with like they're close homies and sharing the song, and then it over time builds up because the song is just so good that people want to listen to it and talk about it, and they get new fans over time. So really just like focus on your craft and making sure you're doing good at everything. Because I'll tell you this firsthand, it doesn't matter if you even got Atlantic Records or Universal Music Group signing your song, or if your brand and song is not that good, it's just by itself, no matter how much money they dump into it, it's not going to do well. You got to just be ahead of it all the way. And utilize new platforms like TikTok and Triller that are really kind of like being that new wave of breaking acts. Be there and understand those platforms.
Awesome. Thank you. And then I had kind of an interesting question. So you said that you went to college for a few years, and I mean, I'm in like my fourth year now, and I just switched my major to audio engineering. So I'm trying to do this all the time. Yeah. But part of me feels like I spend too much time on random school stuff and I just want to grind on this. Like, what was your reason for dropping out? Was it part of it like, school's taking up too much time and you wanted to start doing your own thing, or what was your reasoning there?
Matt, you probably remember me from high school, but I was I was good academically, but I wasn't necessarily, I was very ADHD in school and I always get in trouble. And by end of high school, I had a bad taste of what school is. Like, I didn't really have a purpose or real motivation to want to go beyond, I just had to. And because I was like, oh, I need the degree. And to be quite honest with y'all, like, I've always been a better self-educator than going to a school and having to take the test and quiz and read the textbook. Like, I read books every week and I'm reading, I'm always trying to learn new things and try to be, as smart as I possibly can be. And it's kind of funny because I remember I took a few UCLA courses through UCLA Extension about like a year or two ago for marketing. And the classes I started taking, they had me reading books I read like 2 years ago. So I was like, man, what the fuck? Like, I already know all this stuff. So, I mean, for me, it was just that. I didn't really have a purpose. I didn't really feel like the system was meant for me, and I just didn't want to do it anymore. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to go on my own and learn on my own. I wouldn't encourage that for everybody. I don't think everyone's the best self-educator. Some of us just kind of stop learning after school. So you really got to answer yourself. It's like, what's good for you, man? And like, what's going to do you the most favors, really, you know, in the long run? Do you think the degree is going to help you? Do you think it's not going to help you? Do you think you can learn more on your own? You know, I'm not going to be the one to tell you. You got to tell yourself. I will tell you this, though. 5 years down the line after leaving school, I got to say, you know, now I have a more clear idea that if I was to go back to school, and I always think about it every year, I'm like, oh, maybe I should just go back to school. Why not? Just, you know, I have Middle Eastern parents, so they always bring it up to me anyways. When I told them I was doing this speech, they're like, oh, you should go see if you get into San Diego State while you're at it. Like, why not? You know, it's a huge cultural thing for us, but every year I think about it, and now I have a better idea if I was ever to go back to school. I know, like, I'd probably go for law. I'd try to go to law school. You know, like, that'd be my game plan because I really love the legal aspects of the entertainment business and intellectual property law. So that's just my input for you, man.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, I forgot. I think we actually had a member this semester last that was interested in getting to law school for that reason.
Yeah.
Personally, I would never have taken back the education I've gotten from SDSU music, but I still do classes that I feel like are a waste of time. So I think it falls somewhere in between.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's some prerequisites that I think just turn people away sometimes because it's like it's not really related to anything you're going to do later on the line. And you're like, well, why do I need to know this, right? But I think what I will say this is I think the best thing about college is you get resource, you get network. Like, you got to think about it. All of y'all in like 5 years from now are going to get out of college, have solid careers. Hopefully the degree paid off and got you the job too while you're at it. It paid off. So you guys are going to have each other to utilize and to have a friendship to utilize that you built this way. Whereas, like, if you go out of school route, you kind of have the street hustler mentality and have to, like, learn how to network people and be slick like that, right? And that's a lot harder. And it's like, you know, it's a lot less effective in some ways too.
But not impossible.
Not impossible at all.
Any other questions?
I have a question. So, can you tell us about an event that you've held where you've had a lot of lessons learned or really valuable lessons learned?
Few of them.
Yeah, I think one of my questions I even had planned up was to tell us a disaster that might have happened. So maybe that'll tie into what
I have a similar question that I kind of want to like throw out there too. I was gonna say, like, what was the biggest like obstacle you faced, like between the different things you've done, event planning, promoting, or management, like same kind of theme. So I just want to throw it out there.
So, I mean, okay, I guess to touch upon a specific event, I'm not going to name which event it was out of respect to the artist and their team, as they follow me on Instagram and Facebook, so they might see this. But I would say there was an event we did not too long ago that we had a corporate partner in. The biggest lesson I learned out of that was just like really like it was a real challenge because the show actually wasn't selling that well. It was selling so poorly, and you know I'm only 25, and like the show was projecting to lose 6 figures. And when you're 25 and you're thinking to yourself, "Oh, by Friday I might lose $100,000," it's not the best feeling in the world. You're kind of like having heart palpitations. You're sweating. You can't really sleep at night. Like how does this not happen? And the artist was not really cooperative in helping out with the event. The team wasn't really cooperative helping out with the event. And we had a corporate partner that was helping out with the event. But corporations have limitations, right, of what they can and can't do. That's the kind of the beauty of like an independent company versus like a startup company versus a corporation, right? It's like you can maneuver quicker and do a lot of things, but when you have to go get approved every time, it slows you down. So it's like we kind of felt hopeless, and I remember by that point, we just said, screw it. Like, screw the corporation, screw what they say to us, screw what they have to do. I'm not losing $100 grand. I'm going to make this thing sell out. So we just went out our way, and I just took my credit card and I just started, running advertisements in every way possible, even though I wasn't allowed to, and do whatever I had to do to sell it. And luckily, we sold the show out, and none of that ended up happening, even close to what we were projecting. But it was a scary, few months for us. Like, we were like, what did we do wrong here? On the flip side, I think Denise, you asked about this a big challenge I've seen throughout, right? Like a theme.
Yeah, something that you struggled with, and then how you overcame it, or something you're struggling with now due to the pandemic or something.
Due to the pandemic, I would say the biggest struggle is that I can't do what I spent the last 5-6 years of my life learning to do, and I've had to learn to pivot and adapt to new mediums, and now, and I'm glad I got into artist management right before all this happened, so I had at least something to keep going. Luckily, while a lot of my friends have lost jobs or they're filing unemployment, they're not able to make income, I've actually had the best year of my life, as a career goes, because I focused so hard on these new mediums like Twitch. For as of, I put a lot of my artists are Twitch partners now, and that's been a huge success for us. Challenge overall, I think the biggest challenge I've always seen is dealing with artists. You know what I mean? It's when you want to empathize and be in the creative mindset, but sometimes they're so disorganized and so reckless in what they do, and it drives you nuts. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a rapper, Fereza, who asked for a private jet to go to the show, and demanded all this entourage guest list and all this stuff they need to do it, and it costs you a lot of money, and then they just flat out got too high and didn't show up, and just didn't go. Or they're in this dressing room and they don't want to get out, and they're just still hanging out with friends, even though their set started 30 minutes ago. The show's about to be over, and there's a curfew, and the venue won't operate till after that. Or artists, honestly, even as a manager, some of my artists, sometimes, I talk to them, and I'm like, hey, we should do this. This is really good for your career. It'll help you grow. This is what it's going to do for you. They're like, nah, I don't want to do it. Why? I just don't want to do it. Come on, man. Are you kidding me? Nah, I don't want to do it. It drives me nuts.